Assalamu alaikum and hello. It is a delight to be in Riyadh, a great event. Special thanks to the organizers, in particular CST. I am Halim Yanıkomeroğlu from Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. And the title of the presentation or my tutorial today is Integrated Terrestrial and Non-Terrestrial Networks in the 6G era and beyond. So this is an architecture-related talk, and network architecture infrastructure has been a focus area for me throughout my career. Therefore, the ideas that I will present today are not a byproduct of the weekend thinking. Rather, since my master's, over 3 decades, work and collaboration with so many different people, and actually some of my former team members are here, like Professor Safwan now in KAXT. In the program, there are 3 tutorials. This is the 3rd one. And the first one was in particular on satellite communications. And the second one, which was earlier today, is standards relevation, 3GPP related. And I was asked to have minimum overlap between the other 2. Therefore, this presentation is on some other aspect of non-terrestrial networks. And then I will not get into standards part. If I were to put an alternative heading to this presentation, I would prefer HAPS networks in stratosphere or in near space. And then I don't really want to tie this presentation to any generation. We will, of course, 6G is a very hot topic in our circles, but let us put that aside for a moment. I am trying to develop a vision towards 2050. And when you have such a long-term vision, obviously, part of it can be hit and missed. So it is a little bit wait and see. I have a lot of slides, and I may not be able to cover all of them, but the slides will be available at the event website. I intend to reserve some time at the very end for Q&A session as well. If you have any burning questions, you can ask right away. Otherwise, we can wait until the very end. So I will start with some positioning with respect to 6G. I will define high-altitude platform station networks, research directions, and then we will conclude. You must have seen slides of this sort many times before. Every 10 years, a new generation comes, and we have legacy key performance indicators like rate, and those get better. Latency gets slower. A very familiar picture for you. Now I have something exciting. Very soon, we will have 6G. Well, I don't see any excitement in the crowd. OK, so how about let us go further? Probably in about 10 years, we will be making another discussion, 7G. Of course, I am saying this in a bit of a sarcastic way. These G businesses are not as exciting as they used to be. So when it was from 2G to 3G and so on, but now if we are talking about 7, 8, and so on, it becomes just +1. Therefore, especially in academia, it is not very healthy that we are unnecessarily too much aligning ourselves with Gs. That is mainly industry's business. We develop novel things, novel concepts, and when they are sufficiently mature, they are projected by industry mainly on real applications. And by the way, 6G is very close anyway. Just in few months, in spring 2025, 3GPP will have a workshop identifying the key enabling technologies for 6G. In academia, we measure time by PhDs. So the smallest block in novelty is 5 years, because it is the PhD duration. If I have a brand new idea, you need a few PhDs back to back. So next year is too soon, and I assume many of you here are from academia. So again, without having the stress of 6G or what is happening in release 19 and agenda item in release 20, again, let us put them aside and have a forward-looking discussion and pursue big and bold ideas towards a wireless and information infrastructure towards 2050. Now, as I said, generation after generation, as the discussion a little bit started lagging excitement, there is a big pressure on ITU as well. And this question is always asked, what is new in 6G? ITU last year came up with this diagram. I'm sure many of you must have seen by now, and we will be seeing this in the coming years. It provides a framework for 6G discussions, and that discussion is partitioned in two parts. In the lower part of the curve, you see incremental enhancements in legacy KPIs. So don't take me wrong, increasing, doubling, quadrupling the rate here in my smartphone needs a lot of mathematics, fundamental research, and things of that sort. But for general public, this started becoming less interesting. So if I write a proposal to my granting agencies in Canada, I will develop technologies to double the rate. Most likely it won't go through, right? So in ITU, in the northern part of this diagram, actually there are the interesting stuff happening. So those blue cells are new discussion items. Never happened in ITU before. I mean, you might say that, hey, I see sustainability there. We have been talking about sustainability. Yes, in academia, but it wasn't an ITU mandated element of 6G. So this is now kind of formal, kind of official. At the moment, the northern parts or cells are not quantitative, they are qualitative. And most likely, when it comes 7G discussions, I don't know whether we will use that term, most likely we will have metrics for what you see in the upper part of this wheel diagram. So when you look at this diagram, in my view, the biggest novel element in 6G discussions is non-terrestrial networks, NTN. Once again, NTN is not a new topic, satellites and so on, but as an integrated architecture, this is very novel in 3GPP world. Here in particular, I am talking about direct-to-device. That is your smartphone, unmodified smartphone. Today, it is a dual-mode device. Indoors, we connect to Wi-Fi, outdoors, cellular. Tomorrow, it will be a triple-mode device. Opportunistically, it might be connected to the satellite networks, everything transparent in a seamless manner. And it's not accidental that this was said many times yesterday in the panels. Most of the agenda items in World Radio Conference 2027 are NTN related. Sharing the spectrum, having harmonized spectrum, interference mitigation, things of that sort. So it is a really hot, novel topic in 6G and beyond. Now, this picture shows coverage in Canada. And as you expect, coverage, at least the picture is giving the impression that it is good where the population exists, where the, my home, Ottawa, is shown by the red dot. And in the upper parts, actually, even backhauling is satellite-based. But this picture really doesn't tell the reality. This is a little bit difficult to see, but an enlargement of Ottawa region. So the picture is giving the impression that everywhere around Ottawa, like you put a radius of 200 kilometers, you have pretty much perfect coverage. The reality is far from that. Everyone in Ottawa would know, and Safwan will second me, hopefully, If you just cross the river in Ottawa and go to the northern part to your cottage, just half an hour drive, there is no connectivity. And actually, if you just drive to Toronto from Ottawa, not drive, take the Via Rail, our national train service, we are talking about a G7, G8 country, one of the biggest economies in the world. And we are talking about the southmost part of that, just north of US border, national capital to the biggest city, 1/3 or 1/4 of the tracks, there is no signal. So on one hand, we are talking about 6G, XR, AR, and so on. In reality, there is no 2G on the ground in extended periods. By the way, the human person is extremely insensitive and tolerant when it comes to disruptions of connectivity. You know, if a few frames are lost, no big deal. You lose the voice. Again, we are very tolerant. But tomorrow, since we are making a thought experiment, think about 2030s, 40s, robots of all sorts are everywhere, whether these are cargo drones or other things. Those may be much more intolerant to connectivity disruptions. Now, from that viewpoint, we can bundle the first 5 generations of wireless technologies as the technologies that brought mobility to our connectivity. Obviously, the definition of connectivity evolved. It was voice in the beginning, and then smartphone now, and tomorrow we will have other wearable gadgets like XR. But the bottom line is, basically, you don't need a tether. However, with 6G, a new era is starting, and this is now ubiquitous hyperconnectivity. Ubiquitous in the sense that whether it is in the plane, in the boat, sailing, tracking, wherever, connectivity is there. You don't think about these bars. I have, good signal, pretty much like your watch. If you have watch, you never think about, now I'm just boarding the plane, whether it will work or not, right? It works everywhere. So connectivity, we want it to be like that as well when the time comes. Now, let us put that discussion there, since it is an NTN discussion. Humanity, from very early times, have been fascinated about space for good reasons, in particular deep space, like moon and beyond. I'm not sure if anyone watched this very successful movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey. And this movie is from 1960s. So my point is, when it comes to space, humanity always over-predicted. In 1960s, people thought that by year 2000, which is 25 years ago, we would have colonies on Mars and so on. Of course, didn't happen. Even the moon landing has stopped. Only now, more recently, we are exploring the outer space, much closer part of the space, and obviously this audience is very familiar with the opportunities that satellite communications and networking will be bringing us, is bringing to us, and the entire event is about that. But there is more to this story. Really, in my view, the most exciting part is the near space. The least understood part, and in my talk today, I will try to make a case, and by near space, what I mean is a lower part of atmosphere called stratosphere, between 18 and 50 kilometers, but most activity is around 20 kilometers above the ground. Just to put a perspective, obviously LEOs, which is a very trendy topic these days, and other types of satellites are at much higher altitudes. For instance, LEOs would be typically, like Starlink, around 500 kilometers. And again, we are, on the other hand, talking about 20 kilometers, orders of magnitude closer to Earth. And once again, just to give a perspective, Starlink, as of today, has more than 7,000 satellites in its own constellation. Now, if I put a slide like this, Maybe not this audience, but many other people might say that, hey, wait a minute. You are talking about satellites, we heard that a lot. Decade after decade, and it was never successful. So basically, this is not more than same old, same old. Actually, it is not. And this figure is telling you a lot. This is showing the number of annual launches to space per year. And actually, the figure only goes to 2 years ago, 2023. If I were to put 2025, it would be going to the rooftop. And imagine 2030, 2040. If you see any figure like this, this is not the same old. Something very interesting happening here. Yes, the industry had a lot of turmoil, but it was in this region. So this region is very different. I mean, this doesn't mean that Starlink will be a big success. Starlink might go bankrupt, but that is kind of a secondary point. Overall, this sector got a tremendous momentum, never like before. Now, the main case of failure, if I may say, of the previous satellite momentums has been the lack of business case. There was never enough sufficient number of customers, and then big investment, you know the storyline. Therefore, the most important thing for the success of this new momentum is direct-to-device. That is connectivity from satellites to my unmodified smartphone. By the way, no one, in my view, will want to carry 2, 3 different devices. If the community want to make this a success, the target should be your smartphone. Now, even today's Starlink has a few million customers, maybe 3.5 million customers as we speak. There are 10 billion smartphones out there. So if direct-to-device becomes a reality, the business case 3, 4 orders of magnitude, I'm not talking about percent, will be increased. So we are not talking about a $1 billion business, we are talking about a $10 trillion business. Now let us look at the situation as of now, November 2024. If you are in rural and remote and there is no connectivity, even the small SOS message that you are receiving in your iPhone, I'm not sure if it is available in Saudi, but in many parts of the world it is possible, it is disruptive. It is the important beginning of a new type of connectivity. However, the story is very different when you come to urban and suburban because there is terrestrial network there. And if you compare what satellites today, November 2024, offers with the terrestrial network, it is behind, well, orders of magnitude behind. So when you take, for instance, throughput, the SOS message, I assume, would take only kilobits per second, but your smartphone easily gets 10 megabits per second, right, everywhere. So easily 4 orders of magnitude difference. But that difference is getting lower, or the gap is getting narrower very rapidly. And now I will use a few equations here, why that gap is. What is the problem with direct-to-device? So take any application, whether it is a high-end application or a low-end application, it doesn't matter. The application will have a quality of service requirement. We might measure it in bit error rate, so bit error rate has to be lower than some threshold. That would mean that your SNR, your signal quality, EB over N naught, has to be higher than some threshold. For instance, in this example, let us assume you at least need 12 dB to run your application. And not noise power spectral density is a constant, therefore it all boils down to bit energy. You should have sufficient bit energy for that application. But what is bit energy? Bit energy is received power at your device divided by rate. Since we are interested in high rate applications, To have sufficient EB, I have high received power. So that is the problem. And it all boils down to whether in such a circumstances you can close the link in your link budget. Now, if I have this textbook equation for received power at your UE, it really fundamentally depends on 4 factors. It is the transmit power at the satellite, the boost by the antenna gain of the satellite, divided by path loss, and then the second boost in your device. Fundamentally 4 enablers. There are other factors, but all secondary. Now let us look at these 4. Let us make them work right so that I have enough received power, and for a high rate application, I have enough EB and sufficient SNR, right? Now, transmit power of the satellite difficult to increase. That results in bigger satellites. Energy is, of course, a very scarce commodity there. Path loss, well, you can bring satellites close to Earth only so much, so we don't have much gain there as well. And if we are talking about an unmodified smartphone, antenna gain is also limited. So, very clear from this simple equation, your big handle is the antenna architecture of satellites. And it is not accidental that all these new generation direct-to-device initiatives, whether it is AST Mobile or Starlink Gen 2, they are all targeting more and more powerful antennas. This 8x8 array of AST Mobile is already operational. And the company has permit from US agencies to put up a 30 by 30, 900 meter square antenna array in LEO orbit. It is like unheard of, but will likely be happening very soon. So after that introduction, let me move to the real topic of the day, and that is high altitude platform stations. But I think I put it in the wrong place in the agenda. Maybe one final mark. So we said that the rate is much lower of satellites in comparison to terrestrial network. I should also mention that satellites today, constellations, are not a competitor to terrestrial network in urban areas. Another reason is they don't have sufficient capacity. In terrestrial areas, think Riyadh, how many base stations there are, but you might have just 24 satellites in the sky of Riyadh. However, even there, the gap is closing. Just look at the Starlink satellites. In just a matter of a decade or less, the capacity of each satellite has increased an order of magnitude, very substantial. So now the second part, and that is the high altitude platform station. So what is this beast? Here comes the ITU's definition. We are talking about a platform attached to an aircraft of some sort. And just let me pause there. That aircraft might come in different shapes and forms, like a sophisticated balloon, or a zeppelin, or a glider, or an uncrewed airplane. And then that platform carries a lot of equipment for communications and other purposes that I will unpack in the coming slides. One very important salient feature of HAPS is that it is not orbiting. So you just launch it in the skies of Riyadh, it stays there. It doesn't move. Now, I don't want to really complicate this discussion, but if I don't say the following, it will be incomplete. In ITU terminology, in recent years, another term emerged, and it is HIPS. HIPS stand for HAPS as an IMT base station. IMT base station meaning like base stations working with spectrum allocated to terrestrial networks. Read it like 4G, 5G, and so on. So if we have a HAPS acting like a base station similar to terrestrial networks, but in stratosphere, ITU calls that HIPS. So in ITU jargon, if you say HAPS, it means that it uses spectrum for other parts that is not the IMT spectrum. But in order not to complicate the discussion, I will just stick to the term HAPS. This is what we do in academia. However, in the rest of the talk, whenever I say HAPS, I actually mean HIPS. So it is like a big base station in stratosphere. So you see some gliders. By the way, these are not toy gliders. The Zephyr project, for instance, some of you might be familiar, wingspan 65 meters. It's quite large. And then this Thales Alenia concept, Zeppelin, 135 meters by 65 meters. It is like a huge building. And imagine the lift capability. And then some NASA pictures. These are some advanced, sophisticated blimps or balloons. And then this is from a project by SPL. I guess SPL is in the event, Stratogenic Platforms Limited, I believe. It is a UK company funded by Deutsche Telekom. It is working their planes with hydrogen fuel, and it is uncrewed. Having said all these and all the excitement, I have to put a big footnote. And the footnote is that most of the pictures I have shown, they are actually artist renditions. So the biggest problem, the biggest mushkila for HAPS, we don't have stable aircraft as of now. However, given the interest and developments, it is highly likely that in the next decade and the following years, there will be aircraft types suitable for the purposes that we are discussing today, but I will come to this point again. By the way, in ITU, there is big interest for HAPS or HIPS in their terminology. As a matter of fact, the last World Radio Conference just a year ago in Dubai, the most important agenda item was this action agenda item 1.4. Basically, ITU allocated a lot of spectrum in low band, less than 3 gigahertz, harmonized spectrum for HAPS or HIPS operations. So if an operator today in Saudi, STC for instance, would like to deploy a HAPS, you can connect to that with your smartphone frequencies. It is possible. So if from a regulatory viewpoint, it is possible. However, I still have to make a precise remark there. In ITU, at the moment, HAPS should not be deployed on top of the terrestrial architecture, infrastructure. So you can't put a HAPS on top of Riyadh today. You should put your HAPS, or STC should put its HAPS outside Riyadh, just in, if I may call, the rural areas, so that if you are in Riyadh, you connect with your smartphone to the terrestrial network, and when you drive outside at some point, you will make a seamless handoff to the HAPS. However, in the rest of the talk, I would be, since we are not really limited by standards too much in this more academic talk, I have in mind bringing HAPS to urban, suburban areas where the action is, where the money is. So I have started exploring this with my team, my students, with Safwan. We also wrote many papers which are now attracting quite a bit of attention in the literature. So in our vision, HAPS is a super macro base station. In an urban area, you have small cell, macro cell, and a super macro cell. So it is a multi-tier network. I sometimes in my publications call HAPS SMBS, super macro base station. Actually, we were not aware of, or maybe the term HIPS didn't exist in those days. Anyhow, let me kind of give a summary of what I said so far to position HAPS with something you know very well, that is the LEOs. First of all, once again, HAPS is very close to Earth. 500 kilometers, in comparison, 20 kilometers only. And by the way, even LTE standard allows connection for 20 kilometers. Therefore, due to this proximity, line of sight, link budget is very favorable. direct-to-device, peanuts, no problem. Latency, no problem at 20 kilometers. This is a little bit counterintuitive for people who are not familiar with radio science, but actually, you might have a small base station just root 2 times 100 meters away, like 140 meters. If the path loss is 4, path loss exponent I meant, yes, the path loss to the small cell is equal to path loss to the HAPS at free space path loss of 2. Well, basically, arithmetic is very, very simple. 20,000 square is equal to 141 to the 4th. So what I am saying is that your path loss is not that much. It can be comparable to the path loss to a small base station very nearby, but in a cluttered environment. And next, this is not orbiting. This comes with many advantages, like data security, data sovereignty. If you connect to SpaceX, your data is with US government now. Elon Musk is in the part of the US government. I am kind of joking, but obviously it's just satellite is gone next moment. But your HAPS is on top of Riyadh. It is all yours. And then there is no handoff problem. This also reduces the stress in your smartphone. You don't need tracking. And the deployment is easy. God forbid, if there is an emergency situation, earthquake and things of that sort, just a HAPS can be launched. And a very important distinction, this is scalable. You don't need 1,000 HAPS to start business. You can start with 1 HAPS in Riyadh, and then a second HAPS in Medina, for instance. And as the business case becomes bigger, put more and more in a very scalable manner wherever you need. This is just the opposite of constellations. LEO constellations are by design worst case scenarios. They are designed for that. Most of the time, most of your satellites are on seas and so on where there is nobody. But you have to put them up so that you should have sufficient number of them where you need. Anyhow, so these HAPS are huge, which means that they can lift a lot of equipment, more than communications equipment. Actually, I will come to that. That's very important. And again, I am in particular presenting this for urban and suburban regions. If we can make this in urban and suburban, by extension, it will become very easy for rural and remote areas. Whenever it makes sense, obviously we have the other alternative, that is the satellite networks. Now, I'm just changing the discussion a little bit. In my view, the first application of HAPS will not be connectivity, but it will be ISR. That is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So this picture is an unclassified picture from internet, one of the powerful commercial imaging satellites at 600 kilometers by Airbus. So it is showing actually the launch facility of SpaceX, and the resolution is 30 centimeter per pixel. This is as good as it goes today with commercial satellites. What that means is that if you enlarge this picture, it can spot something. It may not identify what it is, but something on the ground with a shape 30 centimeter by 30 centimeter. Actually, in classified domain, there are spy satellites by governments, and they come much closer to Earth, up to as low as 160 kilometers, and we know from their specs that their resolution can be even 5 centimeters per pixel. Now let us do a thought experiment. 2030s, 40s, 10, 20 years time, with bigger HAPS, bigger cameras, AI-aided, you can see a few millimeters per pixel. And when you have in millimeter per pixel, not only that you identify faces, you can distinguish who the person is. So imagine from stratosphere in the streets of Riyadh, I can say, oh, that is Safwan walking. And imagine the applications of this. Hajj season, for instance, this immense crowd. in Haram area. You know, I can't really imagine a better application of HAPS ISR and then these conditions. And you see my HAPS right on top of that, just on top of Kaaba. So again, a visionary picture from one of my magazine papers. At some point in metro areas like Riyadh, big cities, there will be clusters of high-altitude platform stations connected to each other with super high-rate free space optical links. And then antenna architectures are extremely important in this discussion. When you need capacity, you can have pencil beam antennas and bring a hotspot from stratosphere. If your target is IoT, you can have an 100-kilometer radius region. You can give users service on the ground or to drone highways. Applications are very many. And then, as I am saying, connectivity is perhaps the tip of the iceberg. Actually, imaging, sensing, ISR, also localization, positioning, navigations, these are even more important than connectivity. Because when it comes to connectivity, HAPS will be supporting the terrestrial network. I am not advancing this as an alternative to the terrestrial network, but I have more to say on that. So if you can see the faces of people even sooner, you can read the license plates on the rooftops of the vehicles. So any parking infringement in the streets of Riyadh, instantaneously detectable. Now I'm changing the direction of the discussion to sustainability. Remember, sustainability being green, although we have been discussing this for decades now, first time coming to discussions by ITU as an official mandate. So we really cannot spread our energy in an indiscriminate way, and then this have implications for greenhouse emission, so on and so forth. So imagine at the outskirts of Riyadh, there is some sort of a bus or tour bus, let us say. We have 2030s in mind, everyone has XR, body area network. That bus might need 100 gigabits per second connectivity. But that area is not densely populated. So in order to deliver that 100 gigabits per second, my option today is in that neighborhood to put a base station every lamp's post, so that statistically bus is close to an access point, and then once after a minute, what happens? It is idle for the rest of the day, right? So bus moves, only a few of them are active. This is a terrible design from engineering viewpoint. It is over-provisioning, and it is high CapEx, high OpEx, and then from sustainability viewpoint, it is not green at all. And it is just in contradiction with sustainable development goals of United Nations. So can we have a better design? The answer is yes. You can have steerable beams, a hotspot, just dynamically tracking that bus. So rather than putting 20 base stations there, you can get by with single base station. So here is my HAPS. Riyadh is down there. It doesn't look like Riyadh very much, but maybe it is. And then these different beams, they might be like spot beams. This technology is already available from satellites today. And it is very important that I am not wasting my resources. With HAPS, the key idea is resources are pulled together. This is number one principle in traffic engineering. If you can pull together your resources, that is good. So whenever needed, you turn on your spot beam, you give the coverage. When it is over, it is turned off, and then basically that capacity is moved elsewhere. So going back to that example, this is the footprint of Riyadh. Your bus is up left. So I have a dynamic beam just tracking that bus. So this eliminates the need of over-densifying the terrestrial network. And by the way, if you can create a 0.2 beam width at 20 kilometers, you create a hotspot of diameter of 70 meters. So lots of beams just appearing, disappearing, and imagine the implications for interference. If you are working on RRM, like Professor Wissam, basically this is a very new paradigm in RRM. Interference just in very short time appears, disappears with these spot beams, one inside the another. They enlarge, they shrink opportunistically. I have also done a lot of radio resource management work, taking into account this sustainability in the past, and cell switch off is a very important topic, as you know. The problem with cell switch offs, by the way, cell switch off means the following. If a base station is lightly loaded, you just switch it off. That results in gain in OPEX, but the CAPEX is there. You put the base stations densely. The problem is that almost never a cell is empty. So it might be very lightly loaded, and as soon as you turn it off, that few users have to be absorbed by the rest of the network. So you are eliminating one problem, but creating another problem. So a much better approach, and this is some of our very recent work, and some of them may be under review, you can do that with high-altitude platform stations. So deploy your terrestrial network for predictable median traffic. Put your base stations where the users will likely be, but then don't put extra base stations so that statistically someone will be close there. That unpredictable, atypical traffic we can absorb by stratospheric beams. And if you need to turn off a base station, the few users can be absorbed by HAPS as well. This, I told you that this talk is not within the framework of standards, but just a parenthetical remark. Some of you might have heard the term NES, Network Energy Savings, in 3GPP. It's a big topic in Release 18, and it will continue to be like that. This is related to sustainability. Now, consider a metropolitan area, like in particular in North America, as many of you would know, communities are very spread out. If you take a city like Boston, just put a radius of 100 or diameter kilometer around that, lots of suburbs. You go through one suburb, just some green field, then another suburb starts. So you put your terrestrial network based on long-term statistics, but you don't over-engineer. So part of or most of the traffic is absorbed by your terrestrial network. If I want to say this in more engineering terms, if the spectral efficiency to a nearby base station is good, you just route it to that nearby base station. But if the spectral efficiency is low to a base station, that is a stressful link. In order to maintain that link, you have to inject a lot of power to increase the spectral efficiency, or you have to dedicate a lot of bandwidth for compensate. Remember, where does rate come from? Rate is spectral efficiency times bandwidth. So you now see where I am going to. In those cases, you can just activate your HAPS beams. So there might be a big population, million, few millions, most of it absorbed by the terrestrial network, but that remaining 100,000 users, in my example, in an area of 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer, that is the suburbs of a metro area, now they can be moved to stratosphere or the connection. And in future, AI can make these decisions in real time. So if I just go and do densification for that 10,000 kilometer square area, I have to provide radio coverage to absorb 10 to the 6 users or 10 to the 5 users. But, and this is really a waste of energy, so it is basically 100,000 meters square coverage per UE. If I turn on those hotspots, I gave the example of 70 meter diameter hotspot, which makes roughly 1,000 meters square coverage, I can get by 1,000 meters square coverage per UE. So you have a gain of 2 orders of magnitude. And in statistical terms, rough order of magnitude, ROM, we might have some calculation error, 1 to 3 orders of magnitude gain in energy. Keep in mind, I am not talking about 10%, 20%. I am talking about orders of magnitude savings in energy. What is the best as a thought experiment? Best is you have like a fiber coming to your device from stratosphere. Since that cannot happen, and the next best is a laser coming, and that is also a no-no for device laser communications, really the best is a hotspot tracking a device which doesn't have high spectral efficiency to a terrestrial access point. Let us move on. In terrestrial networks, and just I'm being vigilant of time here, I still have time, yeah. Every generation, the aggregate sum rate is increased 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. In 6G discussions, maybe this is a little bit too ambitious, but terabits per second hotspots are discussed. Therefore, if you do a projection in about 10 years or so, if not 10 years, 20 years, we will be talking about 100 terabits per second aggregate rate from a node. Actually, we can deliver 100 terabits per second from a HAPS. Now, if you say that, hey, you are talking not in a grounded manner, my grounding point is Viasat-3. Viasat guys are here and they had their demos and so on. Viasat-3 is arguably the most powerful geosatellite of today. And it is operational, and it delivers terabits per second from a single satellite. How is that possible? The answer is simple. It has 1,000 spot beams. So if each spot beam delivers gigabits per second, you get terabits per second. Now, if I can have 1,000 spot beams at 35,000 kilometers away, I can certainly do much better at 20 kilometers. And if you can have a Zeppelin-like HAPS, it is much bigger than a geosatellite. It can lift that. So we have actually 50 years of experience with satellite communications and also some sort of early cellular communications if you go back to 70s. And HAPS, from one viewpoint, it is like satellite because it is way up there. From another viewpoint, it is like a terrestrial network because it is like a hypothetical mast 20 kilometers and you put a base station on top of that. Long story short, the best practices from satellite networks and terrestrial networks, we can bring them to stratosphere. Another visionary diagram from some of magazine papers, we can once again think this as the skies of Riyadh, and then all types of different beams. Sometimes I repeat myself, but you will need narrow beam for capacity, but sometimes you need coverage for IoT, then make your beams bigger. And then the cluster in the skies of Riyadh is connected to another cluster in Dammam and another one in Breda, for instance. They are all connected with laser links, and all of them are connected to your satellite networks. Once again, this is not an alternative, neither to your satellites nor the terrestrial network. And obviously, this is much bigger than connectivity. Sensing is in the picture, imaging is in the picture, ISR, navigation, positioning, so on and so forth. So it is truly transformative. I expect that by year 2050, like in 25 years, globally, we might have 10,000 to 100,000 HAPS in the skies of urban areas. So if you envision or conceptualize the wireless and information infrastructure for green and sustainable cities and societies, then a big enabler is this new connectivity infrastructure. Sensors are everywhere. That is the IoT part. At some point, the processing power will be AI and quantum mainly. and then everything is connected with this integrated ground, stratosphere, and space network. At the expense of repeating myself, whenever you need extra capacity for atypical, unpredictable surges, there is really no better way than turning on your HAPS spot beams. The key features of HAPS is that it has a very large footprint. It is just sufficient for a large metropolitan area, and with line of sight, it is a very good link, and then this allows centralization of resources, whether it is antennas, it is bandwidth, computing, storage resources, so on and so forth. So if you are driving from Riyadh to another location 100 kilometers away or even 200 kilometers away in a smart highway of 2040s, how do you give connectivity? Well, the heavy traffic, the payload can go to roadside units, but you don't need handoffs. Data plane can be pushed to stratosphere. Examples are very many. So let us say that you want to have a digital twin of Riyadh. Why do you stitch data from 1,000 small base stations on the ground? You can do that in one shot from stratosphere. And I often show this picture in this forward-looking city concept, the line Neom City. I think it will be incomplete without a HAPS architecture. Now, a few, maybe just 15 minutes on research directions, and then I would like to spare some time for discussion as well. The research challenges are in two different dimensions. The bigger ones are non-ICT, actually. As I already mentioned, building an appropriate aircraft is arguably the biggest challenge. By the way, there is a lot to discuss on that, and there is panel number 8 later today that Professor Slim Aluni, who is with us here, who will be chairing that panel. We will discuss these a little bit more in detail. Aircraft resilience, if I may say, is related to your application in mind. If it is just ozone monitoring, today the balloons are more than enough. This is happening for the last 20 years. And then if it is just sensing, imaging, it is still kind of low-hanging fruit. But when it comes to like an advanced, massive MIMO architecture, very precise things, then the current aircraft types do not seem to be ready for those purposes. And obviously, non-ICT challenges are they are outside my comfort zone. But let us have a look at what we are working at Carleton University and with my collaborators, including Professor Alwini, different challenges or different angles, whether it is edge intelligence, antenna architectures, interference management, cyber security. You know, if you have such a critical infrastructure, any attack, cyber attack in that single node might have just unprecedented consequences. Therefore, cybersecurity is very important in that context, and so on. And again, with my groups and collaborators, I look at this from two different angles. One, concept development, and here I'm having difficulty to see who the authors are. Maybe, oh, that paper on the upper right, Safwan's now famous paper. It's the first paper to use HAPS for smart surfaces and also MIMO, and opportunely you switch from one architecture to another. Probably Safwan has some other papers in this list. Yeah, I see the second one here. That paper actually is the first paper of HAPS and smart surfaces. Anyhow, so we look at it from drone highways perspective, autonomous connected vehicles perspectives, sustainability perspective, and so on. And these are supported by dozens of transactions type of papers. And this is given, I guess, in chronological order. More recently, We work a lot on antenna architectures. The very first paper is by Professor Animesh, who is also with us here from Ohio University, and so on. So these are available at my website for interested people. Let us go a little bit more in detail on the energy side. The power rating of a 5G base station with a modest MIMO, or massive MIMO, let us say, is around 12 kilowatts. And today, HAPS concepts are able to deliver that power, up to 20 kilowatt, let us say, whether it is hydrogen fuel or if you have sufficiently large area with photovoltaic cells. But if we are talking about super macro base stations, lots of operations, edge intelligence, deep neural networks, things of that sort, you will need much more energy. And that is currently a challenge point. However, keep in mind that I am not talking about 6G 2030. I have a vision for 2050. So we expect that gradually there will be advances in energy generation and storage technologies, whether they are more advanced antenna types, or at some point, actually nuclear fusion, this is maybe even beyond 2050, might be an answer that is non-reactive nuclear energy. Just to give a perspective to this discussion, this SPL concept that I mentioned earlier with hydrogen fuel, it delivers 20 kilowatt of power, and it powers a very advanced antenna architecture, and that fuel is sufficient for 7 days of operation. A little bit radical but possible idea is that since this will be a big infrastructure project, in order to power it up, you can also send with drones, with dedicated drones, clean batteries, you take the depleted ones, so on and so forth. So there might be non-conventional solutions for energy. It goes without saying that a low-hanging fruit for HAPS application is disaster scenarios. This paper is in early access of Communications magazine. You would remember the terrible earthquake in northern Syria and southern Turkey about 2 years ago. The entire telecom infrastructure came down, and in such situations, recovery, the first 24 hours are extremely important. So presumably tens of thousands of people might have died due to the fact that telecom infrastructure just collapsed. So if we had the capacity to put up a HAPS or number of HAPS, at least the problem wouldn't be that dire. This is an interesting paper that I co-authored with Professor Salim and some of his team members and some people from my side. This is arguably HAPS has big history for rural and remote coverage. This is arguably the first paper in literature which brings forth an application, a use case for HAPS in urban areas. The application was the following. Small cells do exist as a concept since 1980s, believe it or not. When I started my master's in 1990, I remember vividly papers from late 80s talking about microcells, micro base stations. And it is still not happening to the scale today, because even the equipment cost is very low. It is difficult to bring fiber to every base station. But you can backhaul those small base stations with high altitude platform stations. So this paper is about that, and this paper received this Fred Ellersig Prize. 2 awards were given, and the paper was selected among 1,800 papers a number of years ago. Now, interference management is a really big thing here. This is the legacy ITU vision for HAPS. In ITU vision, in the old days, HAPS is to be deployed in areas where terrestrial network does not exist. In that case, there is no coupling between terrestrial and non-terrestrial. The only issue is your HAPS beams might interfere with one another. So it is an inter-network interference. But the discussion is getting interesting after December 2023. That is when World Radio Conference 2023, this HIPS concept becomes a reality. As I mentioned, you put your HAPS outside Riyadh. So in Riyadh, you connect to the terrestrial network, but if you just move outside, your device switches off, or sorry, the signal is handed over to HAPS. And obviously, the HAPS signal might leak into the Riyadh region, so there is interference concern from that angle. This interference issue is a big ticket item. One of the most prominent companies in this framework is SoftBank, and they are very advanced in antenna technologies. In the panel this afternoon, there will be a representative from SoftBank. As you can imagine, null forming and things of that sort. In my group as well, currently a team of researchers are looking for AI-enabled advanced interference management techniques, also with beam steering. Here the scenario of the future, and future is, in my view, 2031, because the next time World Radio Conference will look into HAPS frequency is 2031. And there, my expectation is that HAPS concurrently deployed with terrestrial network will be discussed. So then we have the terrestrial network and HAPS beams. They are all tangled, and they are using the same spectrum. You can imagine the ugly interference situation, but that ugliness is kind of our bread and butter in research. We have to find solutions. And just a footnote here, when you think about interference in terrestrial network, what you understand is that you are at a location, your signal is weak from your home base station and from the adjacent base station. Typically one base station will be creating interference to you. But when HAPS is on top of Riyadh, seeing 100 macrocells, so it is a much more tangled, interference-rich environment, needs a lot of work and study. So antenna architectures are very important topic, not only in satellites, but even more important in HAPS networks. I already mentioned this SPL company. If you feel interested, please look at their internet presence, advanced architectures, and dynamic beamforming. I already have shown the AST mobile picture. By the way, this is from SoftBank. SoftBank developed this reference, I should say, antenna architecture. In recent literature, everyone working with antennas often show as baseline as the cylindrical antenna of SoftBank. If you take a planar array, the problem with the planar array is that, imagine HAPS is giving coverage to ground, it is here. Planar array does not radiate well to the sides. But when you have cylindrical array, you have an advantage there. So we have a lot of work in cylindrical arrays, but more recently, we designed a hemispherical array, a 3,160 element ultramassive MIMO, and actually just simulations from a paper which just came out. So if we have a SoftBank antenna, it is spectral efficiency on the ground, just without making the discussion too complicated. You can look at the lower picture, and as the color gets darker, spectral efficiency is high. So below the cylindrical antenna, very high spectral efficiency. At the edges, it is still good, but obviously not as high as blue color. And then our hemispherical antenna is blue everywhere. And this is the early access paper, the second paper that I am showing. An AI-enabled version of that is under review in wireless communications. By the way, recently, an antenna architecture that we designed, we have a patent granted just 2 weeks ago, and this technology, Carleton University sold it to Canada's biggest satellite manufacturing company, MDA. The idea there is that in legacy satellite operations, you connect to a satellite and you track that. In the old days, in the skies of Riyadh, there would be one satellite, and obviously you connect to that satellite. But tomorrow, there will be dozens of satellites in a single constellation, in a Starlink constellation or OneWeb constellation. So why you are insisting on connecting to one satellite only? You can connect to a cluster of satellites, and in the limit, all satellites that your device can see in the horizon. This is the good old COMP idea, coordinated multi-point transmission reception, or Cloud RAN idea, but it was never articulated for satellite networks. And then we have developed an architecture that are kind of cluster heads or super satellites. All the energy collected by a cluster of satellites are pushed with free space optical links to the cluster heads, and they are fused at that point. And then a number of papers which are very highly trending in IEEE venues. Just let me go quick. I think I already talked about these applications when it comes to autonomous driving or edge computing. One issue about edge computing in intelligent highways is that you, from your vehicle, push the data to the roadside unit, calculation is computed there. By the time it is sent to you back, you are not in the coverage region of that base station anymore. So there will be a handoff. So the data might be lost, or it might result in a lot of traffic on the fiber. A better approach is AI decides what part of edge calculation should be at the roadside, but if there is a danger of handoff there, that part is pushed to stratosphere, because in stratosphere there is no handoff due to the big coverage region. If you would like to, tomorrow in the skies of Riyadh, thousands of drones for cargo delivery, how do you give coverage to them? There is, again, no better way than HAPS. Maybe one final slide on this localization, navigation, positioning. In future applications, the vertical accuracy will also be very important, and today's GNSS systems, the vertical accuracy is in particular poor. You can, there are probably 3G people in the crowd. You might be saying that, hey, the recent 5G releases allow localization in 3GPP. That is true. But as you know, for triangulation, you need at least 4 anchor base stations. And in a crowded area, in the streets of Riyadh, you might see 1 or 2 base stations, but seldom 4 or 5 in line of sight, clear link. But if you put 2 HAPS in the skies of Riyadh, your 2 guaranteed anchors are there. If you can find 2 base stations on the ground, here we go, you can proceed with your localization. This is a work that Safwan pioneered in the literature, reconfigurable intelligent surfaces. Again, HAPS has the advantage that it has big real estate. Imagine a Zeppelin, 135 meters by 65 meters. It can actually result in very large arrays, but there's no time to get into these. I'll just skip some of these as well. This is an interesting concept that I am trying to advance in Canada. There is Trans-Canada Highway from East Coast to West Coast, and most of Canada's population is around this highway for obvious reasons. Wouldn't it make sense to have a linear constellation of, let us say, 50 HAPS. So you just multi-purpose. You can reach to 90% of Canadian population, autonomous highways, all those kind of applications we are talking of. We have a line of research pioneered by, in part, Benoit, who is here as well, whose paper was one of the top 10 papers in the competition. Basically, I don't have much time here, but satellites, Elon Musk is given credit for reducing the launch speed and making the satellites compact. But imagine tomorrow, satellites another order of magnitude smaller. You can make that without jeopardizing any of its power. The only problem is the radio side. Once radio is there, you need big antennas, power amplifiers and things of that sort. So here is a question to you. Can we get by radio? So I am talking about all optical satellites, only photonics, no radio. Now that sounds interesting, but the problem is you can't reach out to device with laser, with photonics, right? Backhauling might be possible. So how about we have a constellation of all photonic satellites, and strategically in the skies of metro areas like Riyadh and Medina, we put hubs clusters. So the device talks with radio to the hubs, and from hubs onward, it is all optical. So that is a way to realize all optical satellite constellations. If Starlink has a goal of 42,000 constellation, tomorrow, 1 million satellite constellation might be feasible if it is only photonic satellites. But I'll just skip these slides if you are interested. I presented Benoit's paper last week in Abu Dhabi in the inaugural Middle East Communications Conference of IEEE ComSoc. So let us conclude in the next couple of minutes and have 10 minutes of discussion. So what are we discussing here? The discussion, one of the take-home message is that despite the fact that today NTN is synonymous with satellite networks, in reality, there is more to NTN. And that more part is a new network layer in stratosphere. I repeat myself, but this is important. This is not an alternative to satellite or terrestrial network. Rather, we are talking about a complementary and synergistic operation. And when we do it in this way, as I discussed in the context of sustainability, you don't need to overstress your terrestrial network. And generally, when we talk about NTN, the first buzzword comes to mind is connecting the unconnected. The first day panels, still as of today, it is almost unbelievable, a sad story. 2.5 billion people do not have either connectivity at all or a kind of reasonably good connectivity. But when we talk about stratospheric networks, it is more than connecting the unconnected. Connecting the unconnected almost comes as a byproduct. We are primarily talking about urban areas, metro areas, again, where the economic activity is. Tomorrow, there will be lots of mega cities in the world. Lagos in Nigeria is expected to be the first 100 million person city by year 2100. So if you have those mega cities, you really need this infrastructure, not only for sustainable connectivity, but as I said, for edge, for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and for all other reasons. Now, I am not once again talking about tomorrow. Tomorrow in my jargon is 2030. It will, in the beginning, start most likely with sensing, imaging type of applications, most likely with government funds in the military domain, and eventually the aircrafts will mature and then we will see first rural connectivity, and then things will evolve in the next 2-3 decades. Of course, these are very ballpark figures. I would be delighted to see someone like Bezos or Elon Musk maybe emerging from the kingdom here, believing in this technology and making big investment, and then the picture we have seen in satellite launches, how it skyrocketed, we can have such a disruptive phenomena in stratosphere as well. And when this happens, this is truly transformative. It is not accidental that World Economic Forum earlier this summer identified 10 paradigms across all disciplines of knowledge, from health sciences, medicine, so on and so forth, and I think Professor Salim was instrumental in that study as well. HAPS is identified as one of the top 10 paradigms to be watched in the coming decade. So, if anyone found this interesting, I appeal to you, let us work together in the coming years. I would be very happy to collaborate with you, whether you are from academia or industry, to develop a HAPS vision for 2030s, 40s, and eventually 2050 is kind of the limit I can talk without being science fiction, but we can do this together. I will leave it there. So the floor is open for questions now. Please use the mic here and let us have a discussion.
First of all, let me thank you, Professor Halim, on your very insightful presentation. You articulated very well all the good reasons that's why we need HABs and why it's going to be augmenting both terrestrial and satellites. But what's holding the investors from investing money and actually pushing and doing it? You mentioned the flight stability, but anything else? Maybe the energy? I don't know. You're
yes.
the expert.
So again, there are a number of reasons. First of all, from a regulatory viewpoint, currently HAPS is still for rural, because there was this extremely important recent development in World Radio Conference. Harmonized bands have been identified for unmodified smartphone usage with HAPS and terrestrial networks, but even that, it is not in urban areas, it is outside urban areas. So there is still that business case issue, whether there will be enough customers, things of that sort. And then some operators are big suppliers, like NTT Docomo in Japan. Japan is very progressive in that regard. But some operators in the US, and I don't want to give names, but when you go to ITU meetings, they are hesitant due to interference issue. Keep in mind that over decades, literally, hundreds of billions of dollars have been invested in terrestrial network, and here we are not talking about a small glitch. If HAPS comes and you don't make it work properly, it can blanket the terrestrial networks. The consequences are dire. So lots of interference management issues should also be handled. And then this aircraft issue is a big issue, and that played a very big role in why in the last decade Google's Loon project didn't succeed. Again, here we are talking about an aircraft from 15 years ago, a helium balloon. Now, at the moment, we have much more sophisticated aircraft types. So once again, this shouldn't be perceived as HAPS network exists or not exist, but rather we will see developments in a gradual way, step by step. Again, I repeat, but I think it is important. I became to this conviction after years of thinking. First supporters of HAPS will be governments, military. And that is for border security and things of that sort. And that will, and this is already happening. You know, there was this very nice, interesting, what is called in the media, Chinese balloon saga. 2 years ago, people discovered that in the skies of northern US and southern Canada, an unidentified object in stratosphere. Is it a UFO? What it is? And it turned out to be that it's a HAPS actually. China argued that it was a kind of weather balloon which moved, drafted, and so on. We don't know the reality, obviously. But for ISR type of, so first of all, if we are talking about atmospheric monitoring and so on, this is happening for the last 20 years. HAPS is there for scientific missions. But as things get more sophisticated, like cameras, imaging, and so on, that is also happening, although we don't hear much in tactical and military areas. So over time, this will again give an opportunity for aircrafts to improve. Now, this HIPS spectrum exists for harmonized operation. It is possible that STC might deploy 5 years later a HAPS, and as I said, in Riyadh, you connect to STC network on the ground, outside Riyadh, STC HAPS. So it might start with, again, rural coverage, but eventually people will appreciate the value, and it is my thinking that it will just boost with a big infrastructure project in the coming decades. So not a straightforward answer, but my point is that we should have a linear, progressive way of thinking. The advantages are very many. If today we don't have them because, again, it is difficult to make them work. But tomorrow we will manage them to make them work. Satellites today, you know, Starlink is brand new for general public, but Sputnik is from 1957. Canada put up first communication satellite 1962. 60 years, 70 years of know-how, bankruptcies, turmoil exist. We didn't come, this 7,000 Starlink satellites didn't happen overnight. It is building on decades of know-how. So HAPS in some way similar. It doesn't have to go through the same long track. The experience in satellite networks, many of them can be imported to HAPS. So I expect big things starting 2030s onward. Islam, do you have a question? Okay.
Thanks a lot for the great presentation. So what is the effect of the clouds and the heavy clouds, especially on the communication between the HIPS and the base station? Or
yes, this depends on the mode of communication. If we are talking about lasers for backhauling, if there's a, now one, I didn't have time to talk much, but let us say that we build a HAPS tomorrow with 10,000 spot beams. It has an aggregate capacity of 100 terabits per second, big numbers, one HAPS giving coverage to or service to 100,000 people, all good. But let us remember that that data has to come down to earth. So backhauling is another stress point in HAPS. Most likely we will need to rely on lasers there because the links are, there is much more capacity. And as soon as you talk about free space optical, weather, clouds become an issue. Different types of, or different parts of the world are vulnerable in different ways. Canada is not good. Only 20% of the time the weather is suitable for FSO, ground station link. Maybe Kingdom would most likely be better, although sandstorms and so on might have an impact to some extent. But then there is the networking part. So if the Riyadh HAPS due to a sand situation is not good, that throughput might be pushed to Breda and it might be bring down from a ground station there. So options do exist. So if we are talking about RF, the impact of clouds are minimal, negligible. It is pretty much not a big deal. If you are talking about sensing and imaging, again, clouds will be an issue. But technology with AI is progressing so much that with light clouds, you can like 95% remove with AI techniques those clouds, because what you are seeing is the known city Riyadh already in in the memory. There is the city, so on and so. So lots of tricks are possible. So in short, clouds in some use cases might have an impact, but it is not a game stopper.
Also, the effect of the HIPS on the flights, especially in heavy traffic flight regions.
Oh, you mean the aircraft? Yeah. The quick answer is no, because HAPS is at 20 kilometers, and inter-Atlantic, for instance, intercontinental flights, they are around 10, 11 kilometers. So HAPS is above them. You should be careful just in launching the HAPS, but once it is positioned, it doesn't interfere. And I also should mention that in stratosphere, there is really no weather effect. There is no snow, no rain, but there can be winds. Yeah. Okay, I guess it is also 3:30 sharp. We made it right on time. Thank you very much for your attention. Again, I am looking forward to working with you.